This is a talk that's a little bit different than the usual tech talks I give. We're going to talk about what your career options are. It is a time of uncertainty. There are all kinds of things happening in the job market, and maybe some of you are thinking about stepping back and thinking about changing jobs or changing companies. When you do that, it can be sometimes hard because you've had blinders on. You've been looking at the same job at the same company for a really long time. So I want to kind of help you step back and say, all right, what are the options out there where my skills can be transferable and I can cover the skills needed by a new job as quickly as possible. To explain where I come from with this, I'm going to use a picture of myself from the year 2004. This is myself when I was working at a company in Dallas, Texas. I was working from home in Houston, but I would go back and forth to an office in Dallas every now and then. I had started several years earlier working in hotels just because that's what I'd always known growing up. My family was into hotels and restaurants, so I worked hotels and restaurants. And eventually I got sick and tired of working every weekend and working every holiday, and I looked for something that would pay better and would let me keep my weekends and holidays free. So I ended up stumbling into tech. I'd always loved computers, and I knew a lot about hotels, so I went to work first for a hotel management company doing like desktop support, help desk support, systems administration, then gradually started dabbling in development and working with databases. Then went to work for a hotel software company, the kind of company that sells things to hotels, like a software as a service. So I was able to use my hotel knowledge plus some of the things that I'd picked up along the way in order to gradually move into that career. These days, I focus on databases. I focus on databases like Microsoft SQL Server or Postgres. Other databases that you may have heard of include things like Cache, Oracle, MySQL, and so forth. What I personally focus on is emergency 48-hour turnarounds. I dive into a Microsoft SQL Server installation, and I have 2 days to explain to the company exactly what's causing their problems and exactly how to fix it. I kind of equate myself to like an emergency room trauma surgeon for databases. You don't want to develop a long-term relationship with a trauma surgeon. If you find yourself regularly seeing an ER trauma surgeon, that probably means that you made some bad decisions in life. But when you need an emergency room trauma surgeon, you want the absolute best that's available quickly. That's the kind of work that I do. I get to jump around between a wide variety of companies and meet a lot of different technical staff. So the example that I'm going to use is actually healthcare. Imagine that you're working in tech for a healthcare company. Let's zoom out and let's think about the different parts, not just the database, but also the things that interact with the database. For example, there are apps for doctors and nurses, things that they may use at your bedside to check your patient medical records, to enter in the treatments that they want for you, to check your insurance, to view your x-ray. There are all kinds of things that doctors and nurses will use. They may use a laptop, a tablet, a desktop computer. And all of that data is stored in a database somewhere. It's not actually stored on the laptop that they move around with. Those laptops have to be disposable, and then they need to be able to use another one and rapidly pick up your information from anywhere. That's why the data is stored centrally in a database. Then there are also reports that management and analysts will use. How many patients are in our hospital right now? What has been our turnover in terms of beds? How much excess capacity do we have? Which procedures are getting covered by insurance? Which ones are not? How can we claim more for insurance and so forth? When you're working in tech, it's really easy to have those, or when you're working in a specific industry, it's really easy to have those blinders on and forget just how many jobs there are available for each of these pieces. For example, for the apps for doctors and nurses, I almost called them nooses, there's the user who actually uses the application directly, the doctor or the nurse. But then there are also support people for that application, and there are developers that go and build that application. The developers are working for software vendors, and those developers, just the term developer, doesn't nearly encompass everything that's involved with building and hosting those applications. In terms of the database, there are support roles available for that. That's really what I do, is kind of a support role for the database itself. Then there are also developers who actually work on building databases. Companies like Microsoft and Oracle, for example, hire people like that. And then there are, on the report writing side, there are the users like management and data analysts. Then there are also support roles for them, people who help them get their data more quickly or help them understand how to use the data, like tech support. Then there are also developers who go and build the reports, build the systems that you're going to use in order to do reporting. Now, in terms of this presentation, there are jobs that are deeply specific, like doctor, nurse, obstetrician, medical lab technician, and so forth. Those people may use the apps for doctors and nurses. They may use the reports. Those jobs are out of scope for today's discussion. I am not going to talk about how you get a job as a doctor, for example. Instead, we're going to talk about the tech jobs that are involved in support and development typically. We'll start with one that you may be aware of, help desk jobs. Most of us are aware of this because we've called for support at some time when we're trying to either use the apps or access our reports. These people tend to do things like break fix support, then plus the users need help understanding how to access that technology. The people who take help desk jobs need to be good with people. They don't necessarily need to be deeply technical, but they need to be good with people, because everybody who calls the support line is frustrated and, oh my God, I'm having all these problems. Can you please help? They need to be able to calm the people down and get the people to do what they want. Have you tried rebooting your router, for example? People who work help desk jobs get a lot of exposure to a lot of different people and to a lot of different technologies. They may be, as we would call Jack or Jill of all trades. They may work with lots of different technologies. Those skills are completely transferable. Every company in the world needs help desk staff. The larger the company is, the more help desk staff that they need. This need will never go away. It is not being supplanted by AI. You would think that AI would present a genuine problem for help desk jobs. You would think that users would ask the AI, I'm having this problem, how do I go about solving it? But what you often find is that the people who are calling the help desk, they can't get their computer to work correctly. They can't get online correctly, or they're not quite savvy enough to read the directions. This job is never going away, despite how much AI comes in. Throughout the session, I'm going to talk a little bit about AI for each job, just because I want you to know it's very popular for people to hear AI is taking all the jobs, and you want to be aware of which jobs AI is actually taking and which ones it's not. Okay, so that's help desk jobs. Let's go to a radically different job, development jobs. We're still talking about applications over on the far left-hand side, but a developer is the person who builds those applications. They work with tools like C#, with Java, with SQL, and they write the tools that will render on an end-user screen or make the phone calls or process things in an application. They don't need to be as good with people because, generally speaking, developers are not interacting directly with end users. The larger that a company is, the less likely it is that these people are picking up the phone and taking support calls from end users. At very small companies, you'll find that the developers may have to be roped into some tech support, but it's fairly unusual. This people who work for this may work for a healthcare company directly, or they may work for a healthcare tech company like a software as a service industry. Now, you'll notice throughout here, I'm completely just talking about healthcare. We're going to circle back and talk about different industries here in a little while. This person doesn't necessarily need to know anything about healthcare, and that sounds counterintuitive. You'd think that the person building the application for a doctor or a nurse or a lab technician would need to know about being a doctor or a nurse or a lab technician, but there are people who translate what the end user needs over into what the developer needs to do. They write documentation, design documentation, so that the developer can take that documentation and just build the app. I wish it was super easy, but it's not. Artificial intelligence, you'll often hear people saying that AI is going to make development jobs go away. That's simply not true. AI is a tool that developers will use in order to make themselves more productive and faster. There are, in some cases, AI tools that will do development for you. You can describe in plain English the kind of application that you want, and AI will go off and build it for you. That tends to be for small apps that I would call glue. Things that help two things stick together. I want to track my favorite movies along with the actors that were in them and the wine that I was drinking at the time that I watched that movie. If I have some kind of unusual thing where I want to glue a few pieces of data together, AI can solve that for me. But as you start to get up into the enterprise level or even small to mid-sized businesses, you're going to need real developers to do the development with AI tools. And even the people who do AI are frankly upfront and admitting about that. GitHub, for example, is a big software development shop. And they recently said that, or came out and said that still we absolutely require humans to do the big bulk of our development. AI is just a tool that they use. Another job is report writer. This can also be sometimes called a business analyst or a business intelligence developer. These are people who take stuff from the database and they turn it into reports. They design the reports that management will use in order to make decisions. These people have a mix of technical and people skills, because they need some technical skills. They're not necessarily very deep. It's not like they had to go to college for this. Not to minimize the work. It is still hard work, as all of the jobs in this session are. But they'll use tools that are a little easier to approach, things like Power BI, Excel, and SQL Server. They'll write queries in order to get the data out. These kinds of jobs work with people to find out what reports they need, and they figure out where the data is stored and how to get that data from the database accurately. AI is considered a threat here. AI is considered a threat because the way that report vendors are pitching their products is they're saying, hey, just describe the data that you want and we'll magically build it and present it for you. You don't have to know where the data comes from. We'll find the right source for it. As someone who's done some of this work in my life, I can tell you that AI is not solving that problem in the next few years. Because I've worked with end users, and if I even say things like, which product is the most profitable? Well, people who are doing this data work say, what does profit mean? Does that mean before tax or after taxes? What kinds of costs are you willing to include? Are you talking about over the last year or over the last 5 years? What if a product was only introduced 1 month ago, but it's been really profitable in that month? Do you want to count profit as a per day number, or do you want to count it overall? What about the development costs of building these products? How should we allocate that out? Getting this kind of data is way harder than it sounds. Now, AI can give you an answer quickly. It's just not necessarily the right answer, as people usually find out. We've just covered 3 jobs so far. We're not going to cover a whole lot more than that. But with those 3 jobs, you start to notice something. So I've broken out here help desk, developer, and report writer. And they have different people skills required, industry-specific skills required, and tech skills required. You want to start thinking about those 3 kinds of skills and which one of those you have and which one of those you enjoy, which one of those you want to spend more time working on. I also put a note in here about which ones require formal technical education. When I say formal technical education, typically this job requires a computer science degree. It didn't always require a computer science degree. For example, I dropped out of college 3 times. There's a whole story to that. But when you hear stories from people old like me with gray hair, our experience was a lot more different than people who are trying to change jobs in more modern times, where there's a lot more competition from people globally too, outsourced type stuff. And I also want to think about where they work. You're adjusted to thinking, or you're used to thinking, that the place where you work is the only place that requires your skills. For example, if you work at a hospital, you probably think that the only other place that requires your skills is a hospital or doctor's office. and you think that there's not much competition there because there are just only so many hospitals in your area. What I want to encourage you to do is think about the technical companies that service your industry. For example, if you're using Epic or Cerner on a daily basis, your knowledge of that application and your knowledge of how your industry works is valuable to those tech companies as well, not to mention consulting firms that specialize on your industry. As I continue talking about more jobs, think about those skills that you have today. We're going to assess our skills here in a few minutes too as well. What companies need that position, what skills you would need to pick up in order to get a position that you would want, and whether or not you can pick up those skills gradually for free. I want you to start thinking about building a learning plan of what you would need to get where you want to go. And it's really tempting to go Google for schools that do that particular thing, like development schools. But the problem is Google is loaded with companies who want to charge you to learn that skill. There are lots of skills that you can pick up for free when you're not in a hurry. That's when you want to focus on learning those in your part-time. Let's go back to the jobs. A job that focuses mostly on the database or the servers that are involved in supporting that database is sysadmins and systems engineers. These are networking admins who support things like servers, networks, third-party vendor applications. When their phone rings, it's typically a big outage that's affecting an entire company. This is different from help desks because help desk, most of their time is spent on end users troubleshooting relatively small emergencies. It feels like a big emergency to the end user, but it's only one or two end users who are affected. These people are working on big, ugly outages, or how do we empower a large group of people to do something different. They tend to be on call and they tend to work in teams. This is the kind of thing where companies want 24/7 coverage. There isn't necessarily any industry-specific knowledge needed. Like, they don't need to know in depth about healthcare or hospitality or whatever the industry is. So these kinds of people tend to be able to jump from one industry to another. They don't care about what industry that they work in. If they do have industry-specific knowledge for that industry, that's great, but it's not really required. AI is a tool, again, that these people use in order to be more productive. They'll paste in error messages or logs and say, can you help me understand what would cause that particular error? But AI is not waltzing in and trying to duct tape network problems together, at least in the year 2025, probably not even in the year 2035. Next kind of job that's out there, cybersecurity and privacy. Some industries, like healthcare, are very subject to regulation. E-commerce is another one. Accounting and taxes is another one. Lawyers, law firms, attorneys is another one. And these people focus on the entire stack. They look at everything in order to figure out whether things are compliant. Now, they don't necessarily open up code and start wrenching on the code. What they're more doing is knowing what the legal requirements are, what their insurance requirements are, and then interviewing the developers, end users, support people to say, are we violating this particular regulation? Here are the things that we need to do to be compliant with this regulation. Are we in compliant with that regulation? And if not, they work on making sure that the company moves closer to that. The industry-specific knowledge is very helpful in the healthcare industry, just like legal knowledge is helpful in the law industry. E-commerce knowledge is helpful in the e-commerce industry. But as long as you're familiar with the overarching regulations, whether they be HIPAA or PCI, then that's going to be useful to you. I had Taco Bell for breakfast, just between you and me. Product and program managers or project managers is the last job that we'll mention here. Obviously, there are tons more. But program and product and project managers, these are people who coordinate stuff across this entire stack. They work with big picture stuff like coordinating between end users, stakeholders, managers, and folks, even coordinating between different companies to make sure that we're getting closer to whatever it is that we want. Industry knowledge is really helpful here because you're going to be hearing what users want and translating that into something that developers can hear, and vice versa. Sometimes developers will tell you something is not technically possible, and here's why. You have to be able to translate that into what end users need to hear so that they can come to an agreement about what it is that the app's going to do. The longer that you work for a firm, the more valuable you will become. For example, I know a project manager in the spirits industry, wine, alcohols, rum, vodka, whatever. I know a project manager in that industry who's worked there for like 20 years, and they're practically priceless and indispensable because they know their end users forwards and backwards. They know their vendors forwards and backwards. And if anybody in that company has a question about whether or not something's feasible, they can go directly to this project manager and say, hey, have we ever tried to do blank before? And the project manager can tell them right away, yep, here's a time when we tried it, here's what worked with that, here's what did not. Or if someone at a company needs to get something done, they can go to that project manager and find out really quickly who's good at that particular role. AI is a tool that these people will use to be more productive more quickly because they can do things like use it to summarize requests from end users, reword things from developers. They build Gantt charts to know what the resource bottlenecks are. It's a whole interesting discipline out there. So I've covered several types of jobs. Obviously, there are way more than that. My goal here is to get you to zoom out further and further, looking at other people inside your company and thinking about those roles at other companies. And thinking about that job in terms of three different kinds of skills: people skills, tech skills, and industry-specific knowledge is really what I should call it rather than skills. With people skills really boils down to making people happy while getting them to do what you want, especially if it's something that they don't want to do. Tech skills boils down to specific software packages. There are general tech skills like Windows, Excel, Linux, and so forth. Then there are industry-specific tools. For example, if you work in healthcare, you might be using Epic, Allscripts, or Cerner. Then there are industry-specific knowledge, which, say that you're working in healthcare, relates to how doctors see patients, how patients move through the healthcare system, what insurance companies do, the kinds of pains that insurance companies or end users usually face, regulations that you're susceptible to, the competition landscape, all that stuff. When I think about assessing myself, and I would encourage you to assess yourself as well, when I think about assessing myself, I first think about the industries that I have experience with. Now, I told you that I jump around to a lot of different industries today, but through my life, I've worked a lot with the hospitality industry. So on a 10-point scale, I'd probably rank myself as an 8 out of 10. I know how to talk to restaurant owners, line chefs, servers. I know what the various jobs require. I know how a restaurant is profitable or not profitable. I know the scope of work that's involved in that. I know what they typically need from tech packages. I know how hard it is to keep tech up and running in a kitchen, for example. That may be useful to me if I go to work in a hospitality business. I need to make it clear to that business, here are the industry-specific knowledge that I have about that instantly makes me more valuable to a company that's serving, no pun intended, the hospitality industry. You may have that same advantage in industries that you know well. Another industry that you want to think about is the industry that you're passionate about. I have an absolute passion for the car industry. I wake up every morning and I read the latest news from the Autopian and Jalopnik. I stay current all the time on Car and Driver, Road and Track. I know who's the president of each major automaker. A whole lot of stuff there that would be useful and show passion if I wanted to work somewhere in an automotive industry, even if I might be lacking on some of the other skills. Now, I've been working with SQL Server for like 25 years, so I'll say that my SQL Server knowledge is probably a 10 out of 10. There are people who know more than I do. Maybe if I want to get that precise, I might say 9.8 out of 10. There are people who certainly know more than I do, especially people who work at Microsoft. There are many who know way more than I do. But in terms of the general job applicant population, I'm doing pretty well. Another application that I use all the time, Excel and PowerPoint, I'm probably a 4 on a good day. A lot of you who are watching this are probably better with Excel and PowerPoint than I am. And then I would say my people skills are about a 6. I'm certainly not someone who ever needs to be managing people. And it may look like I'm friendly and outgoing here, but that's just because this is a recorded session and I'm good at presenting, and that's very different from actually getting people to do what you want. When I'm thinking about my career, I think about which one of these I need to focus on next. Maybe I decide that I should focus on my people skills next. Maybe I need to focus on if I want to hire more people. I may want to become a better manager. Maybe I want to become a better salesperson. Or maybe there's a tech tool that I want to focus on. When you're doing this in your spare time, when you're trying to prep for your career in your spare time, there's only so much work that you can put in. And it's really tempting to say, oh, I need to work on everything. But the reality is that when you've got a family, when you've got loved ones, when you've got hobbies, when you need to care for your own mental health, there's really only probably one thing that you can work on at any given time, and you want to have a more disciplined approach to working on that thing. Maybe set yourself up a 4-hour window every weekend and say, here's when I'm going to work on reading a book on people skills, for example. And the thing that's going to shape which one I want to work on first really boils down to which kind of job I'm looking for. It can be overwhelming thinking about all the jobs that are out there and all the possible job descriptions. For starters, just think about these 3 things going across the top. Apps in your industry, the database and the servers itself that host those applications, and then the reports, people who get data out and try to make decisions on there. For each one of those, there are users, support, and developers. Which one of those feels the most right for you based on what we talked about so far, and that'll help guide which skills in your own skills inventory that you want to focus on improving.